past few weeks, we have been checking in with psychologist Dr. Laura Saunders about the warning signs and the process if your child needs support or a psychiatric diagnosis.
So what happens after all of the evaluations and then you get the results? Well, that's what Dr. Saunders is digging into for us today. So good morning. Happy Thursday. How are you?
Or Friday Eve.
I am well. Hello, friends. Happy Thursday. This is quite a dream team this morning.
Oh, thank you.
We are talking about sort of the next steps in terms of, your child's received a diagnosis, and now, what do you do as families, as parents? And I think the number one thing that you can do is really educate yourself. Find out more about this diagnosis. Please, please, please only use trusted websites. There's a lot of false information out on the internet. Please use trusted websites to educate yourself as much as possible.
And, what happens, Doc, if one parent isn't entirely on board with what's happening? Because I think when these diagnoses are handed down, there's also kind of a layer of denial that some parents experience and some grief. You're grieving what you think you thought your child was going to be, or how they were going to act. There's all those expectations.
Right. That's a really good point, Nicole, because it's not uncommon in situations like this that one parent is really kind of open to it and ready to move forward, and another parent is maybe in denial, maybe has a lot of fear and anxiety, which is coming off as resistance. So the more you can provide information and education, it also is really about keeping the dialogue and the communication open. It is okay if one parent is more reluctant at first, especially because they're, as a general rule, parents want to do the best by their children. And sometimes fear and anxiety get in the way of taking the appropriate steps.
So, doctor, you say that seeking guidance, you mentioned educating yourself. Those are all important tools, but where specifically should you go for that type of education or help if you're looking for a little bit extra?
It really depends on the age, and the developmental level of the child. I do think schools are an amazing resource. I do really encourage parents and have to remind parents all the time that they need to be a strong advocate for their child. So based on what their child's issues are, they will have to continually advocate on an ongoing basis, advocate to the school, make sure that there's an appropriate school program in place, and really know that they have to be an advocate with the healthcare system and with the medical system. They really need to advocate as much as possible.
That's important that the pediatrician is also playing a part in keeping the, lines of communication open with the parents, with the school, because I think when you bring some things up, you want that those two schools, no pun intended, to communicate with one another as well, because some of the stuff that you're being presented could be completely out of your, your wheelhouse of what you know.
Right. So making sure your pediatrician is aware of whatever evaluations you've had done or what diagnosis they've come up with. There's some great sites like the Child Mind Institute, the American Psychological Association, the American Psychiatric Association. They have very trusted websites and sources of information. And it really is important also to take care of yourself. That you can only be the best caregiver when you take care of yourself and get the support that you need as a parent.
Just a really quick follow-up, though, Dr. Saunders, because you had mentioned reaching out to schools for help with maybe counseling or appropriate programming. What if your school does not already have those things established? Is that something that you maybe have to look into a different school for your child, or maybe setting those things up on behalf of your child? Is that going to be a longer road or a longer process?
Yes, that's a great question, Caitlin, because not all schools have all services. And as an advocate, and while you're educating yourself and advocating for your child, the school's legal responsibility is to provide an appropriate education in the least restrictive setting. That is actually the legal term, an appropriate education in the least restrictive setting. So you need to advocate for whatever your child might need. And if that is maybe going to a different program or another specialized program, then you need to continue to advocate that. But it does take a lot of strength to get those advocacy bones under your belt, because it really is difficult. And schools sometimes don't always want to do the right thing.
Right.
A lot of times they do, but they need to be pushed to find the most appropriate educational setting.
Yeah, schools can sometimes be quite overwhelmed, you know, especially coming out of the pandemic. We've covered many stories on that. Question for parents once they receive the diagnosis, for those who, you know, are not going down the denial route and are feeling that relief. Why is that? And have you heard or seen of situations in which the parents will actually seek out some, you know, counseling services for themselves as well, and how to deal with all this?
I say all the time, parents know their children, and they know when something seems off or when something seems wrong developmentally. And so, you know, to go down the path to finally get a diagnosis and get confirmation of what you've believed all this time can be a relief. As I've said, it's important to educate yourselves, but then parents really need to get some support also. They need to know that they're not alone. Their child's not the only one that might have A, B, C, or D diagnosis. So getting support for themselves, there's often support groups and other things that they can do to get some support and not feel so isolated as if they're the only parents or the only families going through these struggles.
Right. As you said, it can be stressful for the whole family, and especially for the people who have to step up and push a little bit harder. So self-care has to really then take a front seat as well. Dr. Saunders, thank you so much. Great insight into this topic.
Thanks, Dr. Saunders. Happy Friday Eve.
Have a great day.
You too.